Hey there, guys. So I want to thank you for taking the time to check out today's live stream, where we're going to be going over the topic of proprioception, and I will explain what we're talking about in particular when it comes to this topic. So, of course, before I do get started, I do want to share a few things with you guys when it comes to just to sort of preface before we get started talking about what we're going to be discussing today. I do want to mention that you can check out my website, which is bponlinefitness.com. There's a ton of information on there related to online fitness coaching. You can also check out a ton of free information on there, as well as learning more about online fitness coaching. So it's not only a platform to where you can, of course, sign up for online fitness coaching. I try to make it a platform where you can find out other fitness and nutrition related information, such as in my blog post that I put on my website every Friday. And I always archive the live streams that I do. So usually you'll see the latest live stream on the homepage of my website, and I also have an email list that you can sign up to as well. And I send out an email newsletter each and every Monday. So if that's something that you're interested in, feel free to check that out. Again, it's on screen here, bponlinefitness.com. Another thing too is that if you're not aware, I do live streams. I've been doing 3 live streams throughout the week. This live stream along with TikTok as well as my X Spaces stream. So if you're interested in checking out those platforms, definitely take the time to check those out. If you want the link to join those, let me know. But the TikTok stream is on Tuesday at 12 p.m. Central Standard Time, and the X Spaces stream is on Thursday at 12 p.m. Central Standard Time as well. So definitely check those out if you're interested. The topic that I discuss on those platforms are unique to those particular platforms, so keep that in mind that it's not going to be, of course, identical to what I'm talking about today. So with this topic, let's go ahead and get started with understanding proprioception. And this is an important topic to really be aware of when it comes to really progressing in workouts, as long as, or excuse me, as well as sort of helping you to sort of challenge your balance and stability. So there's a lot of things that I'm going to sort of discuss here when we're talking about proprioception itself. This is an important concept to be aware of, and I think it'll help in a lot of ways, especially if you're somebody that's wanting to build, more stability in your workouts. So these are the topics that we're going to touch on. We're going to go over what proprioception is, why it's the beginner's secret weapon, why it matters most for lifters, how your body learns movement, and training your internal GPS, mind muscle connection, common mistakes that block body awareness, as well as simple drills that boost proprioception. So, the main thing, of course, to get started is to understand exactly what proprioception is. And it is basically focusing on, when we're talking about proprioception, the way that I describe it before we get into these points is that the way you need to think about it is basically how you perceive where you're at, in this space itself. So like for example, when we are like, let's say we're like, when you do like a workout, or if you like stand up and you close your eyes, your body sort of moves. You'll notice that like if you do anything that is, when you have your eyes closed and you're trying to move, your body is going to kind of lose its sort of, perception of where it's at. And that's basically what this concept is that we're talking about, is learning how to sort of master this system of, our awareness of our movement and our coordination. Coordination is another great way that you kind of really connect the two terms, like when we're talking about proprioception, because it's kind of that way. It's basically like where you're the space that your body is sort of existing in and how you're able to move in that space, in other words. So we're focusing on proprioception and we have full awareness of our proprioception. This is improving form, balance, and coordination. When we train this, and we're going to discuss further what this means when we train this, this is going to help reduce excuse me, energy. I always want to say energy injury risk by stabilizing joints under load. And what that means is that being able to be stable as we are using weights or as we're, putting pressure under those joints in workouts. This also makes movement more efficient and leads to less wasted energy. We want to make sure that our movement and our energy is being placed in the right areas so that we're effectively engaging the muscles. There's a hidden sense behind your strength, balance, and control, so why you can move with precision even with your eyes closed. The foundation of every athletic and strength-based movement. So when we're thinking of movement overall, proprioception is basically involved in it. It's involved in it in some way. Like what I mentioned, at the beginning, having your eyes closed, when you notice that your body will shift, if you do this, if you stand up and you have your eyes closed and you stand still, you'll notice your body will kind of shift because it's like you're trying to find sort of your place and where you're at, your the environment in which your body is at is trying to, kind of have this equilibrium and understand where it's at. And that's what this is in, in more simple terms, is that your awareness in the space that you're at. But there's more to it that we're going to discuss. It's not just that alone. So, like I mentioned, as the title of this particular stream and this particular presentation, and that's this is your body's GPS, and that's the way you need to sort of identify it. This is how your body is sort of perceiving space. So proprioception is the internal map that tells your brain where your limbs are in space. So think of it as your body's quote unquote sixth sense for movement, balance, and coordination. So keep this in mind as you're doing exercises. And I think this concept is very important for beginners to get a grasp on. And if you've watched any of my other streams that I've done where I've talked about exercise and workouts, and especially when I've talked about balance and stability, one of the things that I always focus on when I have clients start out with a program is that we'll emphasize basically the aspect of understanding our movement patterns, of understanding how to perform exercises without adding, any kind of weight or stimulus upon the muscles. And what that is really making us more aware of how we're performing workouts, making us think of how we're performing movements, our balance, and really focusing on how we're, our coordination, how we're performing exercises. And that's why whenever I usually start clients out, they'll focus on this aspect of, stabilization endurance, which is sort of this beginner phase of, sort of preparing the body for more intensive exercises as, we move forward. Because the way that I structure workouts is that clients will go through phases. And of course, I have my certification through NASM, so I base it off of the OPT model. I'm not going to discuss, in detail what that is, but the OPT model is basically sort of the structure in which I base my workouts. And the first phase is known as the stabilization endurance phase. This is the starting phase. This is where you're mastering those basic movement patterns and really getting your body adjusted to performing exercises effectively. So beginners, when they start out, why this is a secret weapon is that they chase strength first, but proprioception is what makes strength usable. Again, when we're thinking of stabilization endurance, like I mentioned, that phase of workouts is focusing on body weight. Sometimes it also is challenging a little bit of your stability. There may be like, one leg squat based workout maybe a single leg deadlift, doing body weight movements. There may be some of those movements involved in that particular set of exercises. And those are challenging, but the reason why that we're putting those exercises in and why we're not putting, of course, weight alongside that while we're focusing on body weight is so that we're giving our body that preparation into how we move forward into those further exercises that we perform. Again, the main thing is master movements. And this is not only crucial when we're talking about the aspect of, just the stabilization endurance phase. This is the entirety of your workouts should prioritize your form and technique. Even when we get to exercises that focus on adding weights, your form, your technique, how you are able to control movement matters more than just, increasing weight. And that's the main concept here is that when you're getting started, it's very beneficial that you work on challenging your proprioception and building that awareness. So what this does again is that it trains the mind muscle connection. It's helping you to feel your form instead of just doing the reps. Now, myself as well, a lot of times I'll include some, sort of exercises that do challenge my stability in my routine. And the reason I do that is not only to give myself a challenge, but to also test, my stability. It's important to test our stability. And the more that we train that, the more that we're going to be able to perform more various different workouts and we're going to have more strength to more endurance and performance to perform those workouts. One of the workouts I really enjoy doing that sort of tests your proprioception a lot is known as the Bosu ball dome down squat. And basically, the way that you perform this. So the Bosu ball is actually what's pictured here on screen. And the way that I do the dome down, so what the dome down means is that you would basically flip the ball. So it's like the Bosu ball is basically a stability ball cut in half. And so what you would do is you would have the ball end laying down, and then the flat side of the Bosu ball you would stand on, and that's sort of challenging your balance and stability. And this is another great example of an exercise that builds that sort of proprioception and that awareness in space where your body's at. So when you're doing these types of exercises that involve, sort of challenging stability and things of that nature, you're really helping to build that awareness. When you get started with doing stability workouts, it is hard. It's not easy, especially like when you're doing, single leg squats or when you're doing single leg deadlifts. It's not easy when you get started, but it's the same with anything else. The more that you put in the time to sort of really gain that coordination, that balance, the easier it is to perform those workouts. And they're not only going to benefit, sort of your starting phase of your workouts where you're learning these basic movements, but also when you get into more higher intensity workouts like with weightlifting, this benefits a ton. Because if you think about it, when we progress forward and we go into more weightlifting based exercises, we're really putting a ton of pressure on our body when we're performing those workouts. So it's best that we have that foundation and that base of stability first before we move forward. So again, this builds stability, joint awareness, and injury prevention early on. So another thing you need to think about is why this matters. And I may have got ahead of myself a little bit quickly here going into this next point. But I do want to, again, clarify why this matters when we're talking about lifters, because a lot of people would maybe think that this is just beginner based when it does really benefit lifters in a lot of ways. So why this matters, again, proprioception, our ability to really understand where our body's at, having control of our body and how we perform it, it matters to help lead to cleaner and safer form. Proprioception tells your body where it is at in real time. So when you have better awareness of your body, you're going to have fewer compensations. And what we're talking about compensations is that not we're not compromising form. In other words, we're not, like for example, if you're doing a lunge, your leg is going straight forward. You want to make sure that it's not, turning to a particular way, that your knees aren't caving in. You want to make sure that you keep your body in line. And so lunges would be another great example of kind of that challenges that proprioception because you're having to rely on keeping your body stable as you are stepping forward. So that's what I mean by fewer compensations, where you're not having to sort of kind of override the form. You want to make sure that the form stays, strict and in line. So this is also going to lead to fewer injuries as well as lead to more efficient movement again, which is going to benefit us as we are lifting heavier weights because we need to make sure that that form is in check so that we can progress forward. So stronger mind muscle connection. So your GPS strengthens, or excuse me, sharpens your ability to find and feel the target muscle, increasing activation and mechanical tension. What that activation is how that muscle is being engaged. The mechanical tension is the engagement of that muscle and going through the range of motion. So think about that as well, as that is going to create this is better and stronger mind muscle connection as well. You're also going to have more stability under load. So the better your GPS is, again, talking about proprioception, the better your balance, your core engagement, and joint alignment, especially during compound lifts. Compound lifts, kind of like what I was just mentioning previously, or when we're progressing, we're starting out with those body weight workouts, and then we get to heavier, more weightlifting, higher intensity. We're doing compound lifts like squats, like barbell back squats or barbell, deadlifts, things of that nature. When we're doing those, it's going to require, a lot of coordination and a lot of focus to perform those effectively and also to help with preventing the injury from those exercises. So when we have more stability, it's going to give us more control as we go into those heavier movements. This also helps with power and coordination. So this is not only in the aspect of lifting, but also to be able to, quickly perform movements, be able to really fine tune the timing in your workouts, having control where the bar is going, as well as making your reps smoother, stronger, and more explosive. So this not only translate to your more, traditional weightlifting, but it can also go further if you're wanting to focus on performance and more power based movements like quick and rapid movements. You can also progress from there. When you have that proprioception in check, it's going to allow you to progress further. It also is going to lead to faster skill learning and motor patterning. So, good proprioception helps your nervous system map movements, speeding up technique mastery and long term strength gains. So, these are all the points that you need to sort of keep in mind with this aspect of proprioception. So, how your body learns movements. So, as we're continuing to discuss this aspect of proprioception, I want to explain further on how our body is sort of learning how to perform these exercises. So every rep you perform teaches your body something. The question is what is it learning? So are you teaching your body how to move well or how to move poorly? So today we're going to break down how your body actually learns movement, adapts to new skills, and builds better form over time. So this is the foundation of strength, safety, and long-term progress. So with all of these different movements that we're performing in exercises, we are doing various different movements that target various muscles. So every time you perform a squat, a push, pull, hinge, lunge, stabilize, stabilizing based workout, or bracing, your body is storing that information. So this is kind of going to get into the concept of reps. When you're putting in reps, it's going to start, your body is sort of going to memorize that. And there's something else I'm going to address outside of this as well when we're talking about motor learning and how our body sort of remembers these things. So this is called motor learning. So when you're performing these reps and we're repeating these workouts and our body is sort of getting adjusted to these movements, it's sort of learning and memorizing those particular movements. So what this does when we have this motor learning, it's improving our form, building that coordination again, really having focus on how you're performing the workout. It's making the lifts feel more natural. You're not struggling to perform the workout. The reps become more efficient. You're engaging the muscle more effectively as you're going throughout the workout. More muscle activation increases, which leads to more hypertrophy, leading to bigger muscles. So again, muscle activation is that you're activating more of those muscle fibers in the workout. So maybe when you started, you were still trying to get adjusted to form and those muscle fibers weren't activating. And that's why it seemed like progress wasn't sort of coming along as you expected. So you've over time you're starting to notice, okay, I'm really mastering this form and there's some changes that are kind of happening. And you're going to notice this as you continue to put in reps with these exercises that you're able to perform them so much more effectively than what you started. So that's not only the aspect, of course, of gaining strength, but also of your body sort of memorizing these patterns that you have put on it to be able to perform movements effectively. So you're basically training your body the skill just like with anything else, like if you're reading, you're writing, or playing an instrument. So that's another thing to think about is that when you're doing these workouts, the way that progression works is putting in reps. And this is like with a goal. Like when you're going after a goal, it's something that you continuously have to sort of work on daily. It's building a skill, and that's what it takes when you're wanting to progress in workouts. Movement matters, and the more that you get adjusted to performing those movements more often, the more that you're going to be able to progress more effectively. So that's something else to think about when we're talking about, again, continuing with this topic of proprioception and our awareness of where our body's at as we're performing workouts. Understanding how movement works and how your body learns it is really important to be aware of. Now, as we, sort of move forward, you also need to think about how you can train your internal GPS in your body. So again, training for proprioception can happen in a lot of different ways. One of the main ways that you can do this is to slow down the eccentric phase. The eccentric phase is basically your lowering phase in your workout. This is where, like for example, I've mentioned this before previously. When we think about tempo, if you are calculating tempo, and this is what I give to my clients as well, when you go through, monitoring your tempo and exercise, and you break down your tempo, usually there's three different numbers that are sort of basically separating those phases in that particular tempo. So, like when you're doing an exercise, to make this as clear as I can, because I know it kind of sounds confusing, but in simple terms, whenever you're doing an exercise, of course, you have your lowering phase, your pause, or excuse me, this would be actually your lifting phase. I always get it confused or get it backwards. It's your lifting phase, your pausing phase, and then your lowering phase. So, of course, we're going to lift the weight for a certain duration of seconds. We're going to pause, and this is known as isometric too. This could be considered sort of isometric based sort of phase where we're kind of in between the lowering and lifting. And a lot of times it's very beneficial to pause because that puts more time under tension on that muscle and is going to activate it more. Another thing too is that we have the lowering phase. And with the lowering phase, a lot of times we want to spend a little bit more time there because we're extending that muscle out after the lift. It's important to really focus on controlling each of these phases as much as possible. And this is really challenging that aspect of where you're at. It's going to go into the concept of mind muscle connection, which I'll discuss further another slide. But it's very important to understand, these different phases and how you control tempo in workouts. So again, I kind of went on ahead of myself here. Where you pause, you want to make sure you pause in key positions. The stretch or the contraction really matters. So like with bicep curls, when you're doing that curl, squeezing the biceps, Pausing for that brief moment is going to activate that muscle more. Another thing you can think about is having sort of internal cues to tell yourself: knees over your toes, ribs down, and pushing the hips back. One thing I've always used, and I sort of course, learned it becoming, a personal trainer, is that when you're doing squats, you always need to make sure that your knees are staying in line with your second and your third toe. That's the way that I understand squats every time. Every time I do a squat, I always think about that. And that's making sure that you know that your body is in proper alignment. You can also practice balance drills to help train this internal GPS, single leg work or staggered stance. Like I mentioned, BOSU based workouts with the BOSU ball. Again, the BOSU ball is that stability ball cut in half, the same thing pictured here. A lot of those workouts are really great at sort of challenging that internal GPS that you have and helping to really build your coordination and your balance. You can also use light warm-up sets to map the movement that you're going to perform in workouts. Train the same patterns consistently, get adjusted to a lot of the, really basic movements that happen in mini workouts, your squats, your hinges, your push, your pulls, and also record your lifts for external feedback. When you're doing your workouts and you go through your workouts, think about how well you feel you've went through that exercise. Do you feel like you struggled with staying in balance? Do you feel like you struggled with performing the exercise correctly? Another thing you could also think about is, not only, of course, recording, but if you have a mirror, look in a mirror when you're performing workouts. A lot of times at the gym, of course, the mirror is there for that aspect, to where you can sort of pay attention to form and technique. That's another thing to think about. Think about how you're performing that workout and if you're going through the workout effectively. So, these are all great points to really consider when we're talking about that internal GPS. So as we continue on, mind muscle connection is a big thing as well. So mind muscle connection, I've discussed this over and over again, and I know if you guys have listened to me before, you've probably heard this, but I do want to emphasize it still because it does matter in so many different ways. So mind muscle connection matters because it is helping to increase that muscle fiber recruitment. The more muscle fibers you have, the more it's going to lead to hypertrophy. It's also going to improve that form and stability when you perform workouts. It enhances muscle activation and growth and reduces compensations. Make sure that we're not sort of affecting or basically hindering our form at all. So this is leading to stronger form, leads to stronger muscles. So again, mind muscle connection is basically being, the way that I describe it, the way I think it's very easy to understand, is that you're basically combining mindfulness and the exercise. That's the way that I like to describe it. I feel like it's easier to understand what that concept means. And it's just about being fully aware on how you're performing exercises. You're not going through the motions, you're being intentional on how you're performing this. You're thinking of cueing yourself, you're, focusing on how you're performing that workout. So, how can you improve this mind muscle connection? It's basically the same way as we're thinking of proprioception and our body's awareness. It's sort of the same, similar concept. So again, slowing the eccentric phase. The eccentric phase is your lowering phase in the workout. So 3 to 4 seconds down in the lowering phase of the workout, pausing at the stretch or the squeeze, lightening the load to find clean activation. If you have to at times and you're struggling with form, basically it's not a bad thing to lower that weight down until you can sort of get adjusted to that form. A lot of people feel like they have to, constantly get to a heavier weight, but it's okay to take time to get adjusted to the weight that you're lifting before trying to move up so quickly. So think about really activating that muscle more rather than the load that you're lifting. Again, use simple internal cues, squeezing the muscle, don't swing the weight, pull with the elbows, not the hands, push through heels or midfoot. And when you're doing any of these workouts, like squeezing the muscle, that's what we think with bicep curls. pulling with the elbows when you're doing sort of like rows, shoulder-based workouts, pushing through the heels, like when we're doing, lunges or squats, things of that nature. You want to think of sort of those different cues. So, common mistakes that block body awareness. So, these are points to really be aware of as we're thinking about this aspect again of proprioception. And as we get to towards the end here, I do want to mention a few things to be aware of and common mistakes that you need to really address to really make sure that you're performing these workouts effectively and that you're not sort of hindering that progress. The big thing that I noticed a lot of times with many people when it comes to exercise, and exercise alone, not just with the aspect of, proprioception, is that people rush reps and they use too much momentum. A lot of times I'll see at the gym where people will just really rush through reps and they won't really, you don't feel that muscle working. You'll notice a difference, and this is something I mentioned previously before, but take time to sort of perform the same workout. Let's say you're doing, like an easy bar bicep curl, and you're doing that, just say we're doing it really fast. Do it really fast, a lot of reps, and then switch to doing a, sort of smaller amount of rep, or not a smaller amount of reps, but a sort of slower, amount of reps. And notice the difference with how that muscle is being activated. You're going to notice completely that when you perform that really fast, and then when you perform it slow, you're going to notice that the muscle is being engaged more. You're putting more tension on that muscle when you slow it down. So again, faster reps override your body's GPS. Momentum is replacing that muscle tension. So when you use too much momentum, it's going to affect how that muscle is being engaged. Your nervous system is also getting less sensory information. So this is going to lead to slower awareness and fast guessing. So slow down your reps as much as possible and really feel those muscles being activated. Lifting too heavy too soon. Of course, this is another big one where a lot of people want to lift really heavy weights, but they compromise form. So load becomes a priority and not the technique. Your stabilizers shut down. What that means, we're talking about stabilizers, is that when you're performing workouts, especially oscillation movements, you'll have particular muscles that are helping to support that main muscle that's being engaged. So what that means is that your stabilizing muscles are not really helping to support that main muscle. So you need to think about that as well. You're going to have more compensations where muscles will take over the main targeting muscle or the main muscle you want to target. So this could be your lower back, your traps, your quads. The deadlift, I think, is one that could be a good example of compensation where a lot of people will really, the deadlift, of course, targets the hamstrings, but a lot of times the lower back can sort of overcompensate if form is not done correctly. So you have to kind of think about how you perform that workout. And a lot of exercises are like that, where you really have to make sure that you're not having those other muscles that are compensating to sort of take over that main muscle that you want to target. So if you can't control it, you can't learn from it. And of course, when you're doing lighter weights, it's going to allow you to be more mindful on engaging that muscle because you're not lifting heavy, you're not focusing on really lifting that heavy weight, you're thinking more on form. So think about lowering the weight as needed. Another thing too is ignoring your setup and alignment. How you start your workout does matter as well. If you've watched any of my videos that I've discussed with performing exercises, I'll usually talk about the starting sort of setup. And I'll usually say something like engaging your core. I'll usually say having a slight bend in your knees when you're doing a standing based workout. I'll, mention having your feet hip width apart, shoulder width apart. And what that is that's your starting setup for your workout. When you don't have a proper setup into, before performing the workout, it's going to affect the rest of the form and the technique in that exercise. So with a lot of these mistakes, sometimes people don't have their feet planted, their hips become uneven, their shoulders are shrugged forward, their knees are collapsing in. So if you don't have proper alignment and having, that proper starting position, it's going to completely mess up the whole, exercise itself. You've got to make sure that you're standing in the proper position, that your body's, properly, in a neutral position. A lot of times I'll mention, having your spine neutral, having your body upright, your shoulders back, your chest up. All of that is sort of the setup before we get into the workout. And what this is doing is not only just to do these things just because, it's to help to be able to make sure that our body is engaging the right muscles that we want it to target. So the more that you think about your setup and how you start the workout and having proper alignment and how you engage the muscle, again, like what I mentioned with squats. When we do squats, we want to make sure that our leg or our knees, excuse me, go over our second or our third toe when we're looking down and we're squatting. So that's something that you need to think about as well. Alrighty, guys. So that's pretty much all I have for you today. I hope that you found this helpful and valuable. Again, I really enjoy discussing these topics and really going over these points. I know I kind of went a little bit longer today than I usually do, but I felt like this was something to dive a little bit deeper into because it is very important. I think it's important for beginners, for even, more, advanced lifters, because understanding, how our body is reacting to our balance, our coordination, our stability matters, and that it's going to help with how you perform other exercises as well, especially for beginners. I think this is important to start out with. And even if you're somebody who's been lifting, thinking about these things too really can help to improve as you progress forward in workouts. So, with all that being said, guys, I really appreciate your time. I do have all of my information here on screen if you want to reach out and contact me. Of course, my website is on screen as well, where you can check out what I have to offer related to online fitness coaching. Again, guys, if you have any questions about anything I've discussed here today, feel free to let me know. But I really hope that you found this helpful and valuable. This will be archived as well as my other live streams. So if you do miss any of the streams, of course, you can check them out on YouTube as well. And I do actually upload them to Rumble and Odyssey. I did want to mention that as well. So thank you guys once again for taking the time to check this out. I hope you found this helpful and valuable. And I will see you guys next Wednesday at 12 p.m. Central Standard Time in the next live stream. So thank you guys once again for watching.